Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine Podcast Radio. You're about to listen to an episode of Tech Done Different podcast with Ted Harrington. Do you follow the pack or challenge the status quo? Join Ted as he explores how to succeed by going against conventional wisdom. You'll hear leaders in technology and security tell stories about how they achieve their success by doing things differently. Knowledge is power. Now, more than ever.
CrowdSec, the collaborative and open source cybersecurity solution. Analyze behaviors, respond to attacks, and share signals across the community for free. Let's make the internet safer together. Learn more at crowdsec.net.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Tech Done Different. I'm your host, Ted Harrington, and with me here today is our special guest, Chris Barron. Chris is the Vice President of Engineering at Respiratory Motion. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Ted. It's my pleasure.
I'm excited to have you on here and talk about some of the ideas and challenges, too, I'm sure we're going to discuss, that I think many of the members of our audience also struggle with, which all have to do with sort of early stage issues. So let's start with funding, because that's something that you have some experience with, how we secure funding. So when we think about the idea of a company that needs to go and secure funding, how should they be thinking about it? Let's first talk about this to founders who haven't done this before, whether they're first time founders or just founders, this is the first time they've tried to raise money. How should they be thinking about it? How should they approach it? What's the advice?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that it can be a long haul, right? So you've got to you have to do a lot of homework. You have to have your pitch has to be really refined, to show that you have all your milestones lined up and what that money that you're asking for is going to actually be used for, right? So that's a key piece of it. It's kind of common sense, but believe it or not, you'd be surprised at how many people don't address that. So it's like, well, what are you going to use my money for? Well, let me see, and it can't be like that, right? You've got to be able to answer that question quickly. You got to be able to say how much money you need for which milestones, how long it's going to take to get to a certain key milestone. So in the case of what I do, which is medical devices, that would be maybe like an FDA approval for the product, which will then allow you to commercialize it, start actually making money and selling the product and getting revenue to the company. So that's like a big one. And that's certainly one that they would ask for a medical device type application. But yeah, it's pretty much understanding what the key milestones are, how long they'll take, how much money each one's going to be, what risk mitigations you might have in place for unforeseen things that will always go wrong. Investors know that that'll happen as well. So you got to be ready to answer those kind of questions.
I see. So that's actually a really interesting insight that someone might go through the hassle of trying to raise money and not know why they need the money. So do you think that happens because of the perception that you need money to validate the idea, essentially? Or like, why does that even happen? Why would someone get that far to raise money and not know why they need it? Let's
say you're an inventor, right? You have no business experience, or you have very little business experience. And you know that you have to develop the product. You're going to have to hire people. You don't know exactly maybe how many people you need to hire, but you're going to need, like, let's say, engineers or whatever. So you know that you're going to need a certain amount of money, but you haven't really tied the work back to achievable milestones, which will actually have some type of meaning and add value to the corporation at the end of the day. And that's just not understanding the way a business is run, right? And a lot of early stage first-time founders, they're doing it for the first time. So they learn, they have to learn the hard way that there's kind of a process to it. There's a process to it, but I should, there's a caveat there. There is a process. However, there's no silver bullet either. Every single invention, every application, every company is going to be a little different. And the investors are going to look at every company a little bit differently. And every team is different, right? So whatever that founding team looks like is different. So the process might be, fairly straightforward in terms of what your pitch needs to have for slides and what type of content you need for your pitch. But the rest of it is going to have to flow a little bit more organically, So
do you think that the needs for what needs to be involved with a fundraise, does it change through the different rounds? Like, I mean, obviously the company or the product or whatever matures as you get into later rounds. So what you're pitching to angel investors is a little different than like a C round or something. But so let's say like an A round. Let's say a company is thinking they're going for an A round. What are the kinds of things at that stage that are critical to success, where, you know, maybe they've proven product market fit, they have some customers, stuff like that? What are the things that they need to be bringing to the table?
Well, I mean, I look at A round as being still pretty early. I mean, sure, you usually have a seed round before that, you know, maybe a couple million or $1.5 million or something. But I still think you haven't really got too much traction until you're well into your A round. So I would think that it's more like the B round, where you could see some pivoting happen with respect to the market and even the application. You also could learn as part of the, you know, what you've done with this money that you've received and some of the work that you've done, is you might find that your regulatory pathway has to change a little bit. Because again, for a medical device, it's an FDA approval process. So you may learn something, whether you're doing some clinical trials or whatever, that has to change, right? So it's like, okay, that direction that we had at the beginning of the A round was this, and now it's got to change to be this. And that could, again, there could be many factors for that. There could be some type of safety or efficacy data that suggests that the product has to be changed in some way from a design perspective. There's lots of different things that could happen during that A round. So I don't know if I answered your question exactly, but.
Well, it's an interesting insight you've provided, that through the course of a round, before a round is completed, before you get to the next round, things may have changed. So how does an investor typically think about something like that? You know, they invested in an idea going down a certain path, and then before that path is completed, there's a pivot. How do they feel about that?
If you're referring to the investors that have invested in the A round, for example, usually they're helping you. You know, at least you have some. If there's a lead investor, you know, they have a seat on the board, and you know, so they're actually providing guidance. And a lot of times they could even be the reason why there's a pivot, right? Because they recognize something that they have more experience, let's say, right? Because they've invested in many more companies than maybe a first-time founder group. So they can provide that guidance. That's one potential thing that could happen, I would say.
What do you think that an investor or investor group is typically looking for in those earlier rounds, the A round or B round? Well, we've been talking about A round, so maybe let's use that just as the baseline for a second. What are they looking for there? Are they looking for, you know, to trust their gut or their instincts? Like, do I think that this founding team can do this? Are they looking for customers? Are they looking for, what do you think are the key elements? I mean, there's obvious things they write about, right? They're like, I want to know the success metrics, but like, what are they, as a human being in the room, what do you think they're really trying to sniff out?
They want to get to a regulatory pathway that's going to make the product something that can be commercialized. So that's the key thing, because if you don't get FDA approval in the United States, you're not selling the product, right? So it doesn't matter how many dollars you have, you need that FDA approval. So that has to be really a very, very important piece of all the activities, you know, that's happening in the company, for a medical device company. It's very different for other businesses. So I don't want to try to steer people in the wrong direction. But and I should also mention that I've only worked in medical device for 30 years. So I don't have experience in other industries. But what I can tell you is that it's really important that, you know, you have everything lined up properly to get the approvals that you need, because B round, let's say, is really about commercializing. You know, in an ideal world, you're ready to go. You're ramping up some type of a manufacturing operation. You know, you've got you're building your sales team, and all that. Your marketing and your sales strategy is being fleshed out. That's really what you'd be doing more than likely in a B round for a medical device startup, which might be different again for other industries, but that's my experience. Because the A round is really, you know, you don't have a product. It's not even designed yet. You know, you might have a prototype from the seed round, but it's not there yet. You don't really have an organization you don't have the infrastructure for a medical device organization, which needs to have certain things like as part of it. So for example, you need to have a quality system, and that has to be a certain type of a quality system for the FDA to recognize that is a product that they'll approve, things like that. So that requires, personnel and different departments and so forth. So there's a lot of overhead. It's actually a pretty long haul compared to a lot of industries because of all that regulatory oversight.
So when you think about the way that you're investing money, whether it's money that's been raised or so you've raised money and you're thinking about how to invest it, And that's a balancing act, right? There's paying for things like, the team, there's paying for, I don't know what all the things might be that you're going to pay for, but how do you evaluate these trade-offs? I mean, certainly getting FDA approval, without it, as you said, you're dead in the water, but it's almost like you have to operate under the assumption that you will get it. And if you do get it, now you have to account for these other things like, I'm a security guy, so obviously I would wonder like, well, how do you invest in security, stuff like that? How's the calculus done for how to spend money when there's this do or die moment at some point, which is FDA approval, but you have all these other things that you also need to take care of in the event that you are approved? How do you balance all that?
Well, I mean, it starts at let's bring it all the way up, 50,000 feet, right? So it starts with, what is the mission? What is the mission that this team is trying to accomplish? What is the medical device? What is the medical device going to do? Is it going to change the standard of care for some type of area of healthcare? Is it going to save lives in a new way? Is it novel, right? But whatever the device is supposed to do, because usually you do start off with one device, what is the mission? And from there, it's just like a tree, right? So, you have it, and it sounds cliche, but, you have to have a good mission statement, because it's the most important thing, and not only do you have to have a mission statement, but you have to reinforce that is the mission with your team all the time. And I've seen lots of companies that, they have the mission statement on the wall, right? You walk in the lobby, they got their core values, they got their, whatever, and they have their mission statement and it looks all beautiful, but they don't even talk about it. And if you ask one of the employees, what's the mission statement of the company that they work for, they don't even know what it is. That's a huge mistake, right? So you have to have that mission. And then you have it's just like a tree, right? So my last CEO had a great way of, and I don't know if he coined the term or if he read it in a book, but we had these things called hinge points. So what's a hinge point? A hinge point is something that, and we used to do them yearly, because, it wasn't like a 5-year thing. It was like every year. What are the things that we have to do this year, or they could be detrimental to the company's success, right? So these are things we must do. They're not really milestones. It's a little different. Milestone would be like getting FDA approval, right? These might be other hinge points. These might be other metrics that would inform, the team on how they're doing, essentially, whether it be the leadership team or investors and, the board or whatever. And that would help steer. Again, that helps steer the direction of the company. So there can be many things. It can be, it depends on the stage, but let's say you've got a product developed and you're starting to sell it now. You could have customer success metrics, right? That's one example. Like, okay, we have to have, X number of cases or calls or whatever that come in, customer complaints and things like that. And you track all these things. And if you don't, you realize that it's going to affect your sales and so forth. And there's people that know how to do this stuff and build on these metrics, right? So, and there's a number of these. And then you can have IP goals, let's say, or IP hinge points. It's like, if we don't secure this particular technology that we're developing in a certain way, where someone else could come right in and cause us some problems with competition, right? So there's another one, and that's actually an important one, is IP. So all these hinge points are pretty critical. And then obviously on the product development side, you'll have some type of a key product development hinge point, which might be that you've got a product that's ready for manufacturing by the end of the year or whatever it is. And they're sort of milestones, but they're a little bit more refined, I guess, and much more specific to different areas of the business. And that's how you do it, to answer your question, kind of a long way to get there. But it has to start at the top and it has to all flow downward.
Yeah, I like that. Starting back to the mission. I've seen it across industries, what you're talking about, where companies, they have their mission and, certainly the leadership, maybe the CEO, believe in that mission, but the communication of it can be really difficult. And yeah, if everyone in the company doesn't know what the mission is, then if you don't know where you're paddling the boat, where's it going to go? So it's a lot more than that, actually, because as I mentioned earlier, the medical device business it's kind of a long haul, right? To go from an inception, from a concept all the way to a commercial product, there's a lot of time, which means that the team has to be a certain type of team that has the patience and the endurance to be able to hang in there, right? And one of the ways that you get people to hang in there and really do their part is it's psychological, right? It's like, well, what do we, we're creating a device that can help cure cancer, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is, but if it's something that's very impactful, you're going to have a much better chance of getting folks to rally behind that goal to in a very organic or very natural way to make it happen. And it doesn't have to be
and that's how you avoid micromanaging all these other things, right? That don't work. It comes from within an individual. That's like, wow, that's a pretty cool, if we could do this, this could save lives, and this is how it would work, or, so people rally behind that. And, I think humans in general tend to, can be inspired by that type of a mission. And then it's finding the right people that are mission oriented, because not everybody is. There are people that just don't care. Well, you don't hire them. And then there are people that say they are, but they're really not, and they have to go because they're bad for the team too. So, but usually, you do a good job with screening people, and when you're recruiting, usually you can find a pretty good group, and then from there it's leadership and management to do the rest.
So you mentioned earlier that you've been doing this specific craft for 30 years. Why did you choose this particular one? So what was it about this field that has so caught your attention? Is it the problems you're solving?
No, I'd love to say I was really clever and I made a conscious decision, but I went to Northeastern University, and they have a co-op education program, right? So you while you're in school, you work. It's a work study program, right? So I just co-opted a medical device company, and it was a good company. Don't get me wrong. But before I was going back to school for my last semester, my boss said, "Hey, you want to come work here when you graduate?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, sounds good." He goes, "I'll pay you $35,000 a year." I'm like, "That's awesome," So that's how I never even interviewed. I tell people this, they don't even believe me. I never even interviewed for a job until I was out of college for 7 years, because I was at that company for 7 years. I literally had never been on an interview. I mean, I guess I technically interviewed for the co-op position, but I don't even know if that counts, because that was kind of a joke. But
that's kind of funny to be like.
Yeah, it was pretty scary when I actually had to do it for real the first time. I was 30 years old, my first interview.
Yeah, you're not quite mid-career, but you're not early career, and you're just learning how do I do a resume? But it did catch your attention enough to keep doing it.
Oh yeah, no, I liked what I was doing there and all that. I mean, if I didn't like it, I wouldn't have taken the job. But it didn't. I wasn't too, like I said, it just sort of happened that way. So, but I do enjoy the work. I'm an electrical engineer by degree, and I spent my first 15 years designing circuitry and electronics, and working with software folks, and actually making the product work before I got into management leadership. So I have a good kind of broad view of how all that works.
So when you think about the successes and failures that you've seen over the past several decades of working in startups in the medical device space, what works? How does one differentiate? Is it something that you're differentiating from the inception before you even think you're going to get approval, or is differentiation something that comes after FDA approval? How does a startup in your space think about how they differentiate against competition?
Oh, against competition. Well, that's interesting. So it depends on if it's something, you're making a better mousetrap, or you're making something that's novel. And that would be the answer, because a lot of devices are intended to be improvements upon an existing product that's out there, right? Let's say that there's something that's deficient. I'll give you one example. Infusion pumps, you see them in the hospital hanging on poles everywhere, right? You've hooked up to an IV. Back in the, it would have been the late, I guess it was maybe the mid 2000s, I guess it would have been. There was a huge recall of infusion pumps, and because there was a problem. There was a reliability issue that after these pumps got to be a certain age, they became really inaccurate, and people were dying and things like that. So it became a huge issue. So there was, lots of startups sprung right out of that problem, right? So here's a problem, it's $1 billion problem, but not only that, it's actually hurting lots of people. So startups sprung out of that as to how they can make a more accurate, reliable infusion pump that can be basically a smart pump, right? Because now the technologies are getting smarter by that time. If you think about, in the 2000s, and microprocessors and all those other things. So I went to worked for a startup company that's exactly what they were doing. They were developing a smart infusion pump. That type of a product is very different, because your competition is everybody that already makes infusion pumps. All the big guys, Baxter and CareFusion and all these other giant companies that have lots of money, right? How are you going to break into that market, right? And then other startups that are trying to do the same thing as you, right? So that's very challenging. And I must say, I don't have that type of sales and marketing expertise to answer that question for that company. But what I can answer is more along the lines of more novel devices. So devices that there's nothing out there like that particular product. So it's a new technology. It's a paradigm shifting technology. And I did do the infusion pump one. And matter of fact, that company was, it was long after I left, but they were acquired and they're actually now a commercial product. So it's great to see it happen, they solved the problem. But I like to go after things that are sort of new and can really change an industry. If you look at some of the other, kind of companies I've worked for. So that's different because you don't really think about competition at that early stage. What you think about is IP, really protecting it because it's new and you don't want somebody else to, just skip over you, especially if they got more money than you. So yeah, so what was the original question? Sorry if I don't know if I answered it, but so you want to make sure you have, if it's a novel type of an application, that you are focused on the design, the product inputs. So again, what are the things that you're going to have to run against for safety and efficacy? Because it has to be safe. There's nothing out there like it, and it has to be efficacious. It has to work. You won't get approved. And the regulatory pathway, by definition, is going to be longer because you're not going to be able to, a device that's already been on the market that you're trying to make a better mousetrap, so to speak, you're going to be able to piggyback off of, it's called the 510K process. You're going to be able to piggyback off of existing devices and say, we're just like them, we're a little bit better. And it's much faster road to market. Where if it's something novel, depending upon if its safety profile, if it's something that could actually kill a person accidentally, that becomes a long process. That's like a PMA. So most of your major drugs, your pharmaceuticals have to go through that, right? Because they can be toxic and whatever. That would be an example. But if it's something in the middle, there's actually an approval process for that called de novo approval. And it's where, you have something that's new. You really can't say you're like anything else, but your safety profile, your risk level is low. You really shouldn't be able to hurt anybody, but the upside's big. It could have a major impact. It could change the standard of care for some type of a process the hospital uses. It could be something that literally saves lives, depending upon what the technology is. So yeah, so that's, again, I don't know if I really answered your question, but it's a tricky question for me, to be honest. So, it depends. Yeah, it depends.
Well, it's a great insight. Yeah, it's a really cool insight, and you're helping me understand the space a little bit better for sure. And even in the contrast, for everyone who's listening who might not be working in medical devices, understanding the challenges from a different industry help us, those of us in, whoever's in other industries, think differently about their own challenges. So I think that's really helpful. Well, as our time is coming to a close here, is there any parting wisdom or idea or insight that you want to leave our audience with?
I would say, so everybody's good at something, right? Or most of us are. Right. And you have a passion, like for you, it's cybersecurity, right? And there's lots of places you can use that passion, right? But I would say apply your passion to something that's meaningful and don't waste it, right? So you can be really good at something and never really do anything with that talent. You think of like an artist, right? Somebody that paints paintings, and they're really, your best artists when they paint something, it's very different from someone that doesn't apply that passion to some type of meaning when you look at that painting, right? So think of your life like a work of art and try to use your passion for don't waste it. Use it, and use it every day. So that would be my only piece of advice.
Yeah, what a great note to end on. Well, Chris, thank you so much. This has been really eye-opening. Learned a lot from you. Thanks for the time and the insights.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. It's been my pleasure. Great talking to you.
For everyone who wants to learn more about what Chris is up to or more about the podcast, go to tedharrington.com/podcast, and we'll catch you next time.
CrowdSec, the collaborative and open source cybersecurity solution. Analyze behaviors, respond to attacks, and share signals across the community for free. Let's make the internet safer together. Learn more at crowdsec.net.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Tech Done Different podcast with Ted Harrington. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.